Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Films. My name is Alan. A people who do not learn from their own history will repeat the mistakes of their forefathers. A government that represses or attempts to change their history loses their legitimacy and mandate to rule. But sometimes history doesn't have all the answers. Sometimes human behavior is not as cyclical as we might all think. Today in 2020, humanity is on the verge of becoming a true space-faring species and a multi-planetary species. And as we boldly go into the vacuum of space, we are inventing new technologies, new policies, and new perceptions of our society. The direction we take in the next half-century will be extremely important in determining the course of humanity. And in the absence of historical parallels, the best guidance we have as a human race now is the plethora of science fiction stories that look into this moment in human evolution. These stories are written by engineers, philosophers, artists, and dreamers, and they represent the best guess at humanity's future. One of my favorite shows of all time is The Expanse, and it's not just because the characters are so well written or the science is so accurate. It's not even about the interesting plot and twists or realistic space battles. My favorite part of The Expanse is that it shows what happens to humanity roughly 400 years from now as we expand into the outer reaches of our solar system. It's one of the most compelling thought exercises that we can engage in, and although Expanse is probably going to be wrong about a lot of things, if not everything, it's still an interesting way to direct our attention. I mean, there's entire industries that speculate and try to predict futures for commodities like cow shit. So we might as well spend some time looking at the future of some more useful things as well. In The Expanse, humanity leaves Earth as a united species, more or less. We're not really told much about this period of time, but by the 24th century, humanity has once again devolved into tribalism. But instead of being separated by nation or race, now we are separated by where we live. We have Earth, the people of Mars, and the people of the Belt. While things are far from stable in the solar system, especially beyond the Belt where water, food, and gravity are scarce, humanity has once again regressed into its old ways and finds itself in danger of starting a solar system-wide war. In the 24th century, Earth is a complete mess. The world is overpopulated and the economy is stagnant, and that's because there just aren't enough jobs for everyone. Most people wait for their government job placement until they're 80 years old, and some of them never get a job their entire lives. Meanwhile, on Mars, life is hard and the people live in pressurized domes. Society is more collective, but also more repressive. There also is 100% employment, or at least close to it. People are willing to work their entire lives on projects that they might never see finished or benefit from. Martians dream of terraforming their planet so that they can one day walk and breathe outdoors just like Earthlings. Although Earth maintains a much larger military naval fleet than the Martians do, their United Nations ships have shorter range munitions, less effective countermeasures, and are generally older and lower tech. The Martians are outnumbered, but it's only a matter of time before they can widen the technological gap and surpass Earth and take control. More militant factions within the United Nations want to force a showdown before the point of no return occurs. Individuals like Undersecretary Sadovir Ehrenreich would much rather win a costly war with Mars today and maintain control over the Red Planet than allow Mars to surpass them. His actions ultimately lead to the beginning of a limited conflict between the two planets, which ends with a nuclear weapon hitting Earth and killing millions. People like Undersecretary Ehrenreich have forgotten that at the end of the day, people who live on Earth, people who live on Mars, and people who live on the Belt are still all essentially humans. And although the United Nations and the Martian Congressional Republic might share different views on policy and governance, their shared humanity gives them the common ground for which peace talks and collaboration can begin. The reality is the two sides could benefit greatly from each other's cooperation. The United Nations is lagging far behind the innovations of Mars. More importantly, they have plenty of unemployed manpower that could find meaning and better life on Mars. On the flip side, the Martian Congressional Republic spends massive amounts of money on defense, which means that terraforming of their planet is being continuously delayed. An environment of peace and collaboration is obviously the most ideal situation here. It would prevent massive amounts of loss and actually promote helpful growth for both of these planets. The fact that these two human nations cannot find a way forward is perhaps the saddest thing that occurs in this entire show. Now, obviously, this clash between Earth and Mars is not just a territorial dispute. It's also a battle between two very different ideologies. Undersecretary Ehrenreich clearly senses control slipping away from Earth and is attempting to rein Mars underneath his control. But for what reason? Does he truly believe that the UN's ideals and style of governance is superior to the Martian one? Or does he just fear losing power? I believe Aaron Wright most likely believes in the latter, which is a trap that leaders here on Earth fall into time and time again. Take a look at the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. This was a battle between free market economics and representative democracy versus a planned economy and a totalitarian dictatorship. But what really ended destroying, or at least collapsing, the Soviet Union? It wasn't the Korean War, it wasn't the Vietnam War, it wasn't our support of the Contras, it wasn't even our support of the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. What defeated the Soviet Union was America's vibrant free market capitalism. It clearly outproduced and outperformed the stagnant Soviet planned economy. In a battle of ideas and economics and political systems, all the United States had to do was be that shining city upon a hill and show that it was better than the alternative. Today, the United States faces similar ideological battles from almost every direction, including from the Chinese Communist Party, one of the other major players in the world today. The People's Republic of China is at the tail end of one of the most drastic periods of economic growth by any nation in human history. It's not surprising that the average Chinese national is very optimistic about the future of their country and their growth. They marvel at the scientific advances and economic growth obtained by their nation in just 30 to 40 years. At the same time, the Chinese government is one of the most restrictive in the world and constantly abusing the rights of its own people and minority groups. The CCP lacks transparency in their governance and have virtually no checks and balances, which has led to rampant corruption, abuse, and injustice. Yet, what does the average mainland Chinese person see in their news when they look at America? They see our crumbling cities, our infrastructure which is falling apart. They see racial tension, violence, and massive amounts of shootings in the streets. In China, only the government is allowed to shoot the people. They also see the weaknesses of democracy. They see politics inundating everything from science to education to our media. And of course, they also see our abysmal healthcare system. It's pretty easy for the average mainland Chinese person to point at America's flaws as an excuse for their own government's egregious actions, like the mass murder and suppression of political activists, religious groups, and minority groups. So, what should our leaders do in this battle of ideals? How can we prove that our system is better than theirs? We could continue this devastating trade war, which destroys the economies of both nations and world supply chains and affects every satellite nation that depends on this trade relation between China and the United States. We could also aggressively patrol the South China Sea and challenge the Chinese Navy openly. These policies, when executed properly, are important at delaying the influence and growth of the Chinese Communist Party. But ultimately, these actions alone will prove to be futile unless we can somehow prove that our system is superior to theirs. The Chinese are extremely innovative people. They're extremely hardworking, and they want success just as much as Americans do. They also have a massive population advantage, and their government has a very effective propaganda system that is terrific at highlighting the weaknesses in our own system. The only long-term viable option for the United States to avoid an expanse-like exchange of missiles and nuclear warheads is for our system to prove that it is superior through peaceful means. As a country, the United States must once again be fearless and become the best version of ourselves. We have to become that shining city upon a hill. The United States is by far the most culturally and ethnically diverse country in the world. We attract the most talented and hardworking immigrants from everywhere in the world. And despite what the news cycle might tell you, the amount of immigration in America surpasses every country in the world, and no other country is more successful at assimilating and welcoming immigrants into this country, like my own parents. This is something that rarely ever happens in any other part of the world at such a high rate. Most countries in the world, including China, are extremely homogeneous, and the majority in those countries oftentimes seek to oppress and prevent minority groups or outsiders from becoming a part of their society. In the United States, people of all color, including the white majority, fight for inclusion and equality for minority groups. It is simply remarkable, and the only template going forward that can assure that humanity will grow successfully and healthily beyond the borders of our planet. We cannot be divided by stupid things like our skin color or birth nation when we journey into the stars. We also have one of the most open and vibrant economic systems. It's designed to empower the individual and encourage free and organic growth. We have a political system that is designed to be fair and have checks and balances and give voice to those who have none. Of course, today in 2020, it seems like things have gone a bit south. In the last few decades, corporations have continued to take over many of these institutions that have once protected us from tyranny. It's becoming harder and harder for the middle class to survive in this country. Everywhere, antitrust laws are failing to rein in monopolies, which ultimately destroy entire industries and replace them with monolithic institutions that are as powerful as the government itself. Lobbyists fill our tax codes and law books with special interests that only make things more confusing and more difficult for the average citizen. Even the media has fallen into complete madness. It once was designed to keep Americans informed and now only seeks to grab your attention like a whore. But not all is lost. There still is so much greatness in this country. The core fundamental values of this country are still terrific. And it all begins at the individual level. It begins with the people I meet on the street every day. Forget the madness that the media pushes into our newsfeed every day. I only see good-intentioned people or troubled people who are struggling to make sense of this crazy world. Which is why the only ideology I've ever endorsed is humanity first. Our shared humanity will always unify us in the darkest of times, as long as we allow ourselves to be reminded of it. Our greatest strength as human beings is our empathy, our ability to see the individual and remove them from the group that they might belong to. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button. My name is Alan, reminding you that life is a movie and you are the protagonist.